Thanks for joining us Behind the Frontline, a podcast providing timeless solutions to everyday workforce and workplace challenges. Frontline Training Solutions is an express employment professionals company, strategically placed between the workplace and the workforce with professionals standing by, ready to combat your unique challenges. Learn more about what we do at frontlineon.com. Thanks for joining us today for Behind the Frontline, our third podcast today, and we're so excited because today we're talking about the question, what assessment is right for us? And it's a deep topic, and we have a lot of different questions that can stem from that, but we are joined in the studio today with Nathan Leaman, Ryan Williams, and Kristen Ekins, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves. Nathan.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Nic, Managing Director for Frontline Training Solutions. Excited to be here. This topic I was mentioning, we could probably do 3 or 4 podcasts on this, so I'm excited to get going.
Yeah, you're going to have to cut me off, I'm sure, at some points. But my name is Ryan Williams. I'm the Leadership and Team Development Manager here at Frontline. And as if anybody knows me, know this topic is deep at a heart level. I love this. So
Yeah.
I'm Kristen Ekins. I'm founder and CEO of Exponential Inclusion, and I am thrilled to be here with you all. I actually have launched a podcast myself recently. It's called Inclusion at Scale. Yeah. And a lot of the work that I do is talking about how do we actually create inclusion on a global scale using people, systems, technology, all of the things so that we can human together better.
I love that. It's a fantastic podcast, and we're going to link that in the comments. So we have 3 geeks in here for assessments. That's what I'm hearing.
Yes!
Yeah.
And you.
And me. Yeah. I'm here for the ride. So
Very good.
Let's talk about it. So
Yeah.
I think there's some issues around assessments. Mm-hmm. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about assessments just in general for a minute. I'd like to categorize them into 2 main categories and then some subcategories. I'd love to get you guys' reaction to this. So organizations use assessments primarily for selection of talent and development. I think those are the 2 broadest categories of assessments. You break down the development side into, personality assessments, 360-degree feedback assessments. Then you potentially get into, I would say, topic-specific assessments like emotional intelligence, cultural intelligence, maybe Strengths Finder, those kinds of tools. And then potentially a 4th one that's kind of related to all of that is around team assessment. How do you help teams work more effectively? Almost any assessment likely can be used in a team environment, but some are designed specifically for teams. So, and within each of those 4 categories, not counting the selection side, I don't know, there are hundreds and hundreds of assessments probably out there. So would you guys categorize it the same way, or did I miss 1 or 2, or how would you see it? What do you think, Kristen?
Yeah, I think you've categorized them well. I mean, in my head, how I bucket them are here's leadership, here's organization, teams, skills, specific skills. But I think that hits on exactly what you said as well.
Right. So when we think about all these assessments, like where do we begin? How do I know what's right for me? That, I think, is one of the biggest challenges organizations have.
yeah, I think those categories can be really helpful, though, right? Because the question I would always ask is, what are you trying to accomplish? Right? What's the end goal here? So, and like you said, you can use a lot of these for both the individual and the team, or you can use a lot of these to help people see themselves more clearly from a personal development standpoint. And so is that the goal, or is the goal to see if people fit right in their job? And so we need to be really clear on what we're trying to accomplish.
How do you decide, Kristen, what's the right assessment when you're working with someone?
Yeah. This is where it helps to know and have done myself, right? A lot of the assessments.
Yeah.
I know we're all, in a sense, assessment geeks here, right?
Yes.
We've taken a lot of them ourselves. And part of it is then, I mean, that's my first question too, is that I tried to figure out what is the root issue going on, if it's an issue, right? If what is the goal that organization is after, or that leader is after, and then kind of go through the Rolodex in my brain.
Right.
Okay, which one might be good here? But I think it is really getting down to, if we don't match what they're trying to achieve, because I see assessments as a tool. a tool, right?
A
And
tool.
A
Right,
tool
right,
in
right.
the toolbox.
Right.
And so sometimes you need multiple tools to get at what they need. But then there's assessment overload. And so trying to phase it in the right approach, helping them get at what skill they need when, that is a key piece to the work that we do as consultants and coaches.
Right, for sure. I think about executive coaching, obviously, is an obvious place where assessments are pretty common, right? So you might be looking at a personality assessment just to bring broader awareness, or a 360 to get other people's perspectives, right?
Yeah.
The power of doing an assessment yourself and saying, hey, this is how I see myself. Kristen and I were actually going over a assessment recently, and I talked about a quote that I heard from Dr. Hogan, who was founder of the Hogan Personality Assessment. He said, the you that you know is hardly worth knowing, and the you that other people know is what makes all the difference. And his point is, it's one thing to say, this is how I see myself, and I do think that there's some valid points there, especially as you compare it then to what other people perceive. Am I showing up the way I think I'm showing up, or is there a big blind spot? And frankly, at the same time, there might be something I think, boy, I really need to improve on, but other people don't see that. It's like both can be true. So knowing the power of bringing in data from other people in the assessment process is, I think, an important thing to be considering.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think you touched on something, because I started even backing that question up farther to go, okay, but why assessments? Why not something else, right? Because, we're in the training and development world, coaching, all that stuff. It's like, why can't we just train people and tell them how they should function or behave? But the why behind assessments is I need to see myself clearly. And, in the professional or working world, there is the intention I have in my behavior. And I love, I wish I could shout out to the podcast. I heard somebody say it because they said it way better than I did, but it stuck with me ever since I heard this, I think a few years ago, is we judge ourselves by our intentions, right? If you've ever caught yourself saying, well, I didn't mean to, right? Yeah. It's like, well, then, but we judge others by the impact of their behavior.
That's right.
Right. And so there's that disconnect there. And I think that's what you're talking about is the you that others know is really what matters, especially in the professional world. When you look at how successful you're going to be, whether it's from cultural intelligence to self-awareness and the interpersonal interactions and communication, et cetera, is intention and impact are often disconnected because I have my own lens and my own perspective and assumptions that come in and how I see other people. So why use assessments? I think overarchingly, other than maybe job fit is maybe a category I'd put a little bit outside of that, but even within that, you learn a lot about yourself of like, oh, I didn't realize like what motivated me or the things that I like about work was different than anybody else. So that difference and that clarifying for people to be able to see like, oh, that is really motivating for me. And I didn't even flag that or say that was important because I just assumed it was important for everybody. Right. So that difference there is why use assessments. It's incredible experience to sit there with somebody, right, and coach them through these things where they start to see that and they go, oh, this changes everything on how I communicate, those aha moments. So why use assessments? I think it brings incredible clarity to people in ways they had never considered. I like that.
It also can, the why can be about the impact of what the organization needs to see, right? I talk about it as benchmarks, or it could be more around how do we get the pulse or a common language so that we can come together and actually have difficult discussions that we may need to have, but we need something that sets us in a way that we have the language to use to have those difficult discussions. And I've seen that across the board. Even in the beginning of my career, one of the first assessments I was using was actually around people who were improving their English language skills. And it was called CASAS. And we would do, and this was more of the learning assessments, the knowledge assessments, right? Figuring out how much are they improving in terms of their language skills. But the most interesting part of that was actually more of an evaluation of how others, the impact, how their supervisors were seeing it, because there was a huge gap. Their language skills were improving, both spoken, written, reading, all of those. But what wasn't improving was the ability for their managers and supervisors to actually hear the differences.
Oh, interesting.
Because of their biases, because of their
For
ear
sure.
being trained in a certain way to hear what they've been hearing.
Yeah.
And so then I had to
interesting.
flip to work with them to start hearing across cultural differences.
Oh, interesting.
A whole nother podcast will come back to.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
That's
let's reel it
awesome.
in.
No,
Yeah.
that's good. Well, the point I think is that assessments can help set a baseline of where somebody is too, and you can come back to it if it's an assessment designed and intended for such a purpose, to come back and say, look at the progress, right?
Yeah.
Because you're right. We don't always perceive the progress accurately. And this moves it into a little bit more of an objective space, I think is what you're saying.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's good. So, Kristen, what's your favorite assessment right now? I'm interested. I know we've talked a little bit, and I'm interested to hear more, but maybe all three of us can throw some things out here,
Yes.
some of the things we really like right now.
Absolutely. So right now, my favorite one is based on emotional intelligence, and so it's called mesh diversity.
Mesh diversity.
I said
Okay.
that. Mesh diversity.
Okay,
And
good.
It's actually, it's fascinating because it shows 3 or 4 different categories of performance and key indicators across. So it's a leadership development assessment.
Okay.
But being based on emotional intelligence, we can actually start to see benchmarks around inclusive cultures.
Okay.
Is it a safe culture? What does belonging look like? So when you use this across an organization, you can start to see the culture of the organization and where there are pockets of needing to improve or really strong areas. So it's
Okay.
both for the individual, but then also can go across the organization really well.
And does a couple of follow-up questions to that. Group reports, does it do group reports?
It does
Okay.
do group reports, but it's in a way it's through dashboard.
Okay, sure.
So
that makes sense.
it's a really slick dashboard, actually.
An online
Yes,
thing where
online
you can
tool.
look at the groupings of people.
And I can work directly with clients to help
Nice.
them embed their values even into this, so they can see what their own company values are and how it connects to how people are behaving.
Okay.
So intent versus impact, it goes right to the heart of that actually.
Okay.
And 360, so you can do it just for yourself.
That's what my next question is.
Yes.
Is it individual or 360?
Yes,
Okay.
and I actually took it again just last week.
Oh, okay.
And interestingly, and this is my second time, taking it. And 2 years ago, I took it because you don't want to take these too often too, because then you start to learn it
For sure, and game
for
it a
any
little bit.
assessment,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
This one though is very, very hard to game. It's a really, I love how their approach is that you can actually, you don't quite know what you're actually answering. Like, oh, am I getting this right? There's no right.
Yeah.
You're right.
That's good.
So it's really good in that way. So I've loved taking it, but then I found this last time around, there was one that they got me. I say that.
Oh,
So I took it, I was
okay.
like, ooh, that's so true.
Okay.
And it was
Interesting.
this moment of reflection. And that's what I think assessments are really good for. This moment of, if you're really going to take it truly and you answer it honestly,
Yeah.
then there's this, the aha, or there should be a moment of, let me reflect on that
Yeah.
a little bit more to see where it's showing up.
Yeah. Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
That's very cool. I got to take it. I mean, I've taken all the
Absolutely.
other assessments, I think. No, not all of them, but
You threw out there, and this is a sidebar, but 360. Do we really talk about what that is? Because I think maybe there's people
That's
out there
fair.
that might not
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
know what 360
I was thinking the same
means.
thing. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. Well, I can do a quick overview of a 360. So it's an assessment that allows you to pull in data from others, including peers, direct reports, most commonly your manager, maybe other groupings of individuals. So what you get is a view of how everybody kind of around you or those closest to you sees you in the same light that you're evaluating. So they're going to evaluate you against the same criteria you're evaluating. But typically the 360 allows for grouping in an anonymous way. Your results and your direct manager results are going to be transparent, but most of the time, everyone else is grouped in some way to make it anonymous. And usually a 360 is going to have both the quantitative and the qualitative side. So you're going to have the data comparison. Well, I scored myself a 5 and everybody else scored me a 4.2 or whatever. But they're also likely going to have some sort of questions in there around what do you think this person's strengths are, or what can they improve on? And that's an opportunity for people just to type in answers. And so you get some of that qualitative data as well. A lot of 360s also kind of have hey, these are the competencies we're measuring, but there's also a section on derailers. So these are the things that could most get in your way. So I don't know if I'm missing anything that you guys would say from your experience, but good check there. Ryan, thanks for asking
I'm
that.
really interested to hear what your favorite assessment is right now.
Right now, okay, I can only pick one, huh?
Yes.
Okay. Kristen's like, I only had one, so yeah. So, and then you're next. So my favorite assessment right now is the Hogan assessment. It is a personality assessment, and it's assessment that is done by an individual. They have, I think, a 360 version, but the core version of it's called the Leadership Forecast Series. It's actually a grouping of 3 assessments that look at leadership competencies, potential derailers, and motivators and values. So the reason I like the tool, one, it's probably one of the most robust personality tools out there right now, very scientific and based on a lot of research, and they're constantly updating their data set and making it and keeping it reliable and valid. So I like that. But it's also designed in a unique way to get at what I mentioned earlier about that quote from Dr. Hogan. It is measuring, basically the tool says, based on how you respond to the statements, it's actually moving a sliding scale. How much is this like you or not like you, right? And it seems like they ask the same question 15 times, and it's always a little different, but they're going after looking for a pattern. But they basically have built the tool to say, based on how Nate answers these statements or rates these statements, this is likely how other people perceive him. Mm-hmm. So it gets at the same kind of thing as a 360 without the complexity of administering a 360. So there's a lot of work that goes into coordinating 15 or 20 people to do 360s and getting them to finish it. And we can't run the report yet because your manager hasn't done it yet. And so everybody's waiting.
And for how many people do they have to do it for? They have to spend a week doing assessments.
Right. So if you're doing an executive team, it's one of the things we've done recently with executive teams. We're doing the Hogan instead of the 360 for that reason. So the CEO doesn't have to fill out, 10 360s. So it's a really interesting thing to say, look, when you look at your results, the first question isn't, do you agree with these results? The first question you should be asking, or thing you should be considering, is, if this is truly how you're being perceived, is that how you want to be perceived? Is there an opportunity to make some adjustments? And what would that look like? I mean, let's embrace who we are, frankly, right? You can't really change, quote unquote, who you are. You can change your behavior. And so this focuses on the experience of other people. So that's why I like it so much. And that's why I've been using it quite a bit. Hogan's got a whole bunch of other side reports. They've got a high potential report that we've used with some clients. I think they've got the 360. They've got skinny down versions and Cadillac versions and all sorts of different things, but it's all based on the same fundamental 3 assessments. So that's mine.
I'll have to take that one too.
Okay, we'll trade.
Yes, we'll trade.
All right. Ryan, talk to us about, I think I know what you're going to say.
Oh, you almost said it, yeah.
I think I know what you're going to say.
Okay, no surprise here for anybody that knows me. I love the DISC assessment. Yeah, shocking. There's a few reasons, so I'm going to sell it to you, I guess. It's simple. There's lots of other assessments. I think the Hogan is also another really great one that helps you see yourself and helps see how other people might see you. What I like about DISC is the simplicity of it. There's 4 letters. You might get a combination of 2. Whereas, I think Myers-Briggs is another really great one. But You get 4 letters.
4
and
letters.
That's too
Twice as
confusing.
much for your money.
That's too
That's what I'm saying.
confusing. That's too confusing for me. I'm a simple person. But I think when you talk about that shared language that Kristen was talking about, I'm a results person. I've taken, I don't know how many assessments, and I've seen them attempted to be used in different organizations at different places, different times. And I think the DISC is the one that I've seen stick. The one that creates shared language. That's a quick, like, oh, D. Okay, I know what that means. I don't have to think, what does E in, or, whereas the Hogan's, like, maybe it's not helpful for other people to see this, but it's helpful for me to see this for my personal development.
Hogan, I would say Hogan is fairly complex. It
The complexity of it.
takes some time to work through and process. It's a little bit different that way.
Which is good because it does give you a deeper look. But when you start to look at team development, which is a big area that, I work in, I see DISC. But also I think you can see the depth. So when you talk about what my favorite assessment is right now, one I've been using a lot is the productive conflict assessment out of the Wiley product world. If you're not familiar with that, it's everything DISC. But what's really cool about this assessment is it takes DISC, but it also uses cognitive behavioral theory, which is basically, what do I think, then how does that drive how I behave? And this specifically focuses on conflict situations. But what it looks like is automatic thoughts. So you start to get into that emotional intelligence space. What is my reaction to the situation? And what I love about it is it's simple and it's very action oriented, right? You walk out and you can have something else that was mentioned earlier is you remove the judgment from all of these conversations, and it really allows us to have an open and honest conversation about how, maybe I do that, and maybe that's not great. And so the defenses can drop a bit as far as when you start to work in that group conversation impact versus intention space, but it also gives people tools to help them do a little bit more introspection. So it can be really used as on an individual level of coaching, but also group conversations. So that's one I've really, really enjoyed recently, but really anything DISC. And one thing I will say, if you had a bad experience with a DISC assessment in the past, not all DISC assessments are created equal, right? Or not all assessments are created equal.
Yes.
And I think you were saying this, Nate, is Hogan has poured a lot of research and development into that. But there's companies out there that they threw assessment together using old data, old science, and people can be really thrown off by the results and get the wrong perspective.
Yeah.
It's not always just the assessment, though, that could throw people off. I'm going to share a quick example of this with the DISC, right? Because I love the DISC too.
Yeah.
And most of the companies I work with, they've taken it at some point. So then you can interlink assessments with that, do crosswalks. That's where I think I can geek out on that type of thing, right?
Sure.
But the funny thing happened. This was the very first professional assessment I took after college was the DISC. And I took it, and the facilitator who was going through, and it was with a group of people, called me schizophrenic.
Oh, that's helpful.
I was like,
no.
Ouch, are you joking or are you being serious right now? I don't know. But part of it was because I was a very high I and had a C that was up there as well. And he said, I don't see that very often. And where I see it now, so I'm now high I still and a high D. And it kind of meets in the middle as the promoter, right? So the interesting thing, though, is I love to have things structured, but I like to create the structure, and I break structures, right? My job is a disruptor. So I go in and I look at things that are maybe created and structured, but maybe they were just there to be there. And that's what I look at, saying, like, how do we make this a better structure? But I also now, at this point in my career, love to have people around me who will support to help create those structures and to do it really well, because that's what they love.
Details.
The details, right?
Yes.
So there's a piece of that I think that's our role as coaches, as consultants, facilitators, to also make sure that we're creating the space and we have emotional and cultural intelligence while we're helping to interpret what these scores mean.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, that's such a important point. This stuff isn't to be messed around with in the
Yeah.
sense of like, oh, that's where I get a little uncomfortable with the freebies. People are asking like, oh, what free one could we do? It's like, I, against my better judgment, there's some out there, but honestly, there's a reason why there's a cost to these things. It's because they're deeply researched, and you don't want to give, I've had teammates who have taken other assessments or whatever, and they were told they were an S. Let's just use DISC, and I'm sure this happens with other ones.
S stands for those who are not familiar.
Support or steady, depending on which assessment, or I'm sure there's other ones. But typically these individuals are more laid back, slower pace, more cautious, and really focused on relationships with people. So they're not going to be your vocal, outspoken person. The reality was, though, the observable behavior, and DISC is all about the observable behavior. It's not trying to tell you completely what your personality is on that level.
How you show up.
It's looking at observable behavior. Well, this person was outspoken, kind of domineering in conversations, but they were told they were an S by an assessment. And that's not helpful.
Yeah.
Right? When you start to look at the impact of their behavior.
Yeah.
So they were kind of dominating, they're, being, this way or that way. And there could be a lot of reasons why they were being that way. It might not be that, but ultimately, I had enough interaction with this person that went, you're not, you're not an S.
Right.
And again, where our personalities are more complex than just our behavior. But when you start to look at the purpose, when we go back to why do we use assessments, the purpose of this assessment is to help people see more clearly their behavior and how it impacts others and how to work better, how to communicate better, et cetera, with the people around them. So that's where I say, this person had been kind of not creating havoc, but the tool was actually doing the opposite of what it was intended to do, which it was telling them, oh, I'm a super supportive, cautious, slow-paced person. Meanwhile, they're leaving everyone and hit their dust because they're so fast-paced, because they were actually fast-paced and weren't slowing down long enough to see what other people's point of view was or input. But they were told they were an S, so they thought they were exhibiting those behaviors. So that's where I think...
it's possible, too, that they had a belief that S was better than a D. I don't know.
Right. Yeah.
I can tell a story. I think we bring our own bias and perspective into our assessments too. Tell a story about a time when I first did the Myers-Briggs type indicator. So I was getting ready to go get certified to be able to train and facilitate the assessment with others. And so I took it. I got there and I got my report, and it came back as an ENTJ. So extroverted, intuitive, thinking, judging person. There's a lot in that, I know. And then I learned about the tool. And in the process of about 3 days, I went from being very convinced I was an extrovert to knowing I'm an introvert. And then I started to ask myself some tough questions. In fact, I went to lunch with the facilitator one of the days. I'm like, why would it have shown something so opposite? And I realized that I actually had a pretty strong bias for extroversion. Like I thought being an extrovert was better. And that came out in how I filled out the tool. But then once I understood what it was about and what we were measuring, and that extroversion, introversion is not do you like people or hate people. It's where do you get your energy? How do you recharge? How do you process? I realized, okay, I'm an introvert. And then I had to actually kind of be okay with that, because at first I wasn't. I mean, at the time I was in leadership development training. I'm in leadership development. That means I've got to be more extroverted and be out there in front of people. But the cool thing at the end of the day about the tool was that it helped me realize who I really was. And that's an example, like MBTI, for when we train it, we'll say, hey, here's what your results come back as, but let's make sure you understand what each element is, and then you can weigh in here. Just because the piece of paper says something about you doesn't mean it's necessarily, quote unquote, 100% gospel truth.
Yes.
Let's go back.
I love that, because one of the other assessments that I've been using right now, which I think is it's more about that interpretation part, right? So you take it, it's not to say, okay, here's our baseline type of assessment, but it's called, so there's two that come with it. One is the Edgewalker assessment and one is an archetypes of change. And it's really looking at how do you deal with change and what is your archetype while you're dealing with change. And it can be situational in a sense then too, because at home, I may take on a certain role like a guardian. At work, I may become an edge walker. And what that is actually to, walk between different worlds, see things that others aren't seeing. I'm bridging these worlds for people. And that is what I am. That is what I do often. But we're also seen sometimes as those people who are instigating the change.
Yeah.
Right?
Instigators.
A little bit. Yeah. But this is where I love these types of assessments because it actually comes down to the first question I ask when someone takes it is, so how do you interpret this? Does this relate to what you think about yourself? What are you seeing? What comes up for you? What relates? What doesn't relate to you? And then finding those strengths. So building it off of Strength Finder even.
Yeah.
So,
combination.
yes.
You talked about that a little bit earlier. Do you have a favorite combo, or have you seen recently? Like, I really feel like these go well together. I have seen Hogan work really well with a 360 called the Leadership Circle Profile. They have very similar kind of undertones as far as these are the behaviors you exhibit that are actually positively correlated to effective leadership, and these are behaviors you exhibit that are negatively correlated to effective leadership. And so those two, if you wanted to do a personality and a 360, not to your point earlier, like overload sometimes, but if you wanted to do both, those two fit well. So do you have a combination?
I'll say, I don't know if I have a favorite yet, but one that I'm doing right now and I like so far. So I'm actually launching a mastermind, if I can talk about that briefly.
Please do.
Okay.
We were before the podcast started.
Yes.
It sounds very exciting.
Yes, and it's called El Camino Mastermind. The reason it's called that is because at the end of this mastermind, it's a 6-month program. At the end, we go and hike El Camino de Santiago, which is in northern Spain.
Yeah.
And so we walk 80 miles, 113 kilometers.
Wow.
VIP style, though. I
Good.
do need to mention that.
You did mention that. Somebody's taking your luggage, right?
Yes.
Resorts.
I will say 24 years ago, I did it as a refugio, they call it.
Okay.
So this is a pilgrimage. If you haven't heard of it, if the listeners haven't heard of it, it's a pilgrimage that you walk. And it goes all the way from France through Spain and into Portugal as well.
Wow.
But you can end, and we're only doing the last portion, so that you end with a celebration at Santiago de Compostela. And it's a beautiful cathedral. So you end there, but along the way, it is a journey. And when I first did it, I had only what was on my back, my pack, and I had only the food that came to me through other refugees that were walking.
Wow.
And so it was just a fascinating, I don't even know how to describe it. It's this transformation that happens as you're walking and just leaning on others. It's about coming back down to humanity and how humanity is connected. So I was inspired to do it again, but this time around we get hotel rooms.
Yes.
We get bathrooms
Smart.
that are not shared, and our luggage transported, because I want the people to think about what it is for them spiritually, what they're on, and in this, the physical challenge that we're going to be after, and the mental challenge that you wrestle with a lot. To prepare them for that, the assessments come in. So during the onboarding phase, after they've signed up, we do 2 assessments. And the 2 that I'm going to marry together for this, cultural intelligence is one, because we're going to Spain, because I'm bringing people from all over the world into this mastermind. My goal is the more countries, and I can only have 10 people in this one.
Okay.
So if we had 10 countries, that would be phenomenal, right? And then we'll see what happens. But as part of it, we're going to build connections between cultures prior to going in. So conflict will happen because we're going to be in the most intense time physically, spiritually, mentally. As we're going through this process, we have to be as prepared as possible to go in. So cultural intelligence will be the first one, our ability to work and relate effectively across multiple cultures, not just national, gender. So we may have people from Saudi Arabia there at the same time as someone from the US, same time from New Zealand. So how do we work effectively across generations, cultures, national cultures, ethnic cultures, religions, all of that? And then I'm going to marry it with Edgewalker assessment.
Okay.
Because who I'm reaching out to for this mastermind are change makers.
Yeah.
They are social impact leaders, global leaders, people who are walking the edge every single day of their life.
Wow.
So we'll see. So I'm choosing them based on the goal that I'm trying to achieve.
For sure.
That sounds incredible.
And when is
excited.
the final finale?
Yes, the finale, we actually we walk in October.
In October.
October
Okay.
17 is the day.
That's awesome. So we need to book Kristen in November for a
Yes.
follow-up
To
podcast.
hear about that.
How did it go?
I'm tired. Just kidding.
We'll give you a few weeks to recover.
Okay, that's good.
That sounds so awesome. How do people find out more if they're interested?
Yeah, actually, I think the best way is to reach out. I'm going to say by email right now.
Okay.
And I'll give you website and everything too. But website is www.exi.global.
Okay.
So exponential inclusion. But it's not on the website now
Okay.
because I'm only sending it out at first to what I call friendlies.
Okay. Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
testing it out with a few different
If you're
people to
listening
see.
to this,
That's awesome.
then,
Yeah, if you guys, if you want the invite, you can be
yourself.
on the friendly list. Fine.
Yeah. Very good.
So that's great. So I want to bring it back.
awesome.
I'm thinking of the average frontline leader, thinking about assessments and whether or not they're right for them and which one's right for them. I mean, I would love to send every person to a
sounds
mastermind course hiking
Yes.
mountains.
3 reservations, please.
But let's
Yes.
think about the average frontline leader for a second who might be listening to this podcast of what would you say is the best way to figure out which assessment might be right for them? Follow-up question. Should these managers and frontline leaders be using these assessments as tools for hiring or termination decisions?
That's the follow-up. I kind of want to
that's
start
the-
with that
Yes,
one. But
that's
Yeah.
juicy.
yeah. So I would say the DISC is a really accessible one. So if we're talking about where would I want to start, just to start to help people understand who they are and how do they interact on a team and how can a team work more effectively together. I think the DISC is a pretty accessible. It's not overly expensive tool. You're smiling.
I didn't even have to say it.
I know. I'm selling it now. So I think that's a great place to start. One of the things we haven't really talked about is, you might tier up the assessments as you move up the levels of management and leadership in an organization. You might get to some of the more complex tools at the mid-level senior director or director, senior director and up. Ultimately, even an assessment process at the C level, you could use some of those tools, but sometimes that's just I need to talk to your people. That's the assessment, so I need to have a conversation.
Yeah.
But I think the DISC is a great place for frontline managers or frontline leaders to think about starting with this and either do it as a team. Ryan, you do a lot of team sessions. Would you say that's a good place?
I mean, every time I do it with any frontline leader, they go, I need my people to take this.
Yeah.
Like, how can I not have this information about them now? And then it's that battle of like, well, can we financially? It doesn't make sense. Like, where are we going to find time? Because that's the other thing is one of the things we will not want to do is have people take the assessment and not talk about it. Right.
Right.
That's
One and
where
done.
Correct.
where I see too many companies waste money.
Yeah.
Really, is like if you're going to have somebody take the assessment and leaders out there, if you're listening, it's like if you're going to take the assessment, like use it, which means you have to talk about it. However that looks, whatever that looks like, you got to talk about it. You got to make sure people understand, what does this mean? How does this play into my day-to-day life, and what does this mean for us working together, right? All that stuff is absolutely necessary, and you won't believe the impact that you'll see, I think, when people suddenly have this tool in their hand.
I'm glad we started talking about DISC because that brought me up to my follow-up question here. So actually, Ryan here is an expert DISC facilitator. We are a certified provider, and he can actually go on site within your company and lead your entire team through the DISC.
Yeah.
We've had a few examples of that.
examples,
lately.
right?
Yeah, lots of examples. And And one of the other things that's really cool with the one that we use is you actually get an online platform, which is really cool and exciting, where you can actually do that comparison side by side. And there's like a podcast people can listen to, not our podcast, but another podcast of just specifically about their style. And so there's lots of opportunity to really bring that back into, are we using this stuff on the day to day? But yeah, like that's been really fun to actually have entire companies take everybody through this, and then suddenly everybody has this language that has really changed the way that they work together. And you see a lot of the conflicts, they're still there, but you suddenly see people just having a new appreciation and value for what other people are bringing to the table, how they're communicating, etc. So
You make a good point, though, about the learning that's around assessments, because I think that's what's changed in the last even decade with assessments, right? It was only a trainer that could come in and help you before. And now there's a lot of micro learning that's happening around. You have to make sure it's quality stuff. But I think that's so helpful for people to have the micro learnings that are available that they can first absorb on their own, as that's the future of learning as well. And it's bite-sized. And then also go deeper as needed. So
yeah, we would love to empower you to take this stuff and own it within your own organization, right? You don't have to call on us every time, you want somebody to take the assessment and talk through it. It's like, no, there's these tools, resources that we can give you so that you can actually do it. The one thing we would say is just make sure you're doing it. Make sure you're having the conversation.
So let's, I know how Ryan feels about this because I've witnessed a conversation before, but let's say that a company or a leader is using something like the DISC results in hiring decisions. What would you say for that or against that?
I would say don't do that. And the reason is that it's not actually created for that purpose. There are tools and assessments that are reliable and valid for selection, legally defensible.
Yes.
And that's an important thing to say. You put yourself in legal jeopardy when you're using an assessment for hiring purposes that's not designed for that. It's just, you got to put it out there, right? So the DISC is not one of those that is. But again, that doesn't mean there aren't tools that can help you determine a person's predilections, preferences, and all that can actually align to the needs and skills and what's needed for the role. Find those tools. We have a number that we can recommend for folks. We use them in our specialized recruiting group and in our hiring processes here on the Express Employment Professionals and Specialized Recruiting Group side. So we have tools that can help, but just a word of caution, like don't use a tool in that way that isn't valid for that purpose.
I'm going to +1 that.
Okay. Thank you.
And then also say there is... think about it for yourself and put yourself in someone's shoes if you were going to be hired on and they took your one assessment and said, I'm going to hire you or not hire you based on one assessment that you took on that day. Right. And it's, if you think about it for yourselves, like that's not fair. Well, because we all have much larger stories than what's behind the one. And this is why we have a whole podcast on assessments and could do multiple on them, because there's so many that try to get at who we are and how we behave. And so I think that's the piece of just thinking through. It's, if you use an assessment, it's part of the story. And it's one of the tools in the toolbox as you're going through the process. But again, make sure you're using the ones that are meant for selection when you're doing it for that.
Yeah, and it actually brings up another question that I wanted us to chat a little bit about is, how do organizations use assessments inappropriately? Like, what are the pitfalls? This is one of them. Certainly using the wrong one for selection is a big pitfall. Another one that I would say I've certainly experienced in my life, some of the organizations that I've been a part of and worked with, is they put so much weight, like you say, on the one result. And so it becomes a number, like, oh, they're this or they're that, and a label. And now you're running into not considering the full breadth of their experience, their performance, all the other things they've done. And I know why leaders do it. I mean, we constantly are trying to decide, do we think this person's going to be successful or not? And we don't ever know for sure. But if we had a number that tells us, oh, that number means they're going to be successful. Well, we know time and again that that's not the case. But leaders like to go to numbers and like to go to labels or letters because it just helps them sort through all the other stuff that they're wrestling with. But that's definitely a pitfall.
Yeah. Not having a growth mindset, I think, is what I see it take people from this place of like, oh, now I either for myself have an excuse as to why I behave the way I behave. And so I'm going to use that as like, oh, I'm just a ENFJ. So that's just take it or leave it. Or I'm a D or IS or C, right? So you see that. And, or, I think to your point, what I would say is I was asking somebody earlier, it's like, what happens when organizations take this too far and it becomes so, because we want companies to use this, create shared language, all that stuff. But then what happens is it becomes cultish almost. Like, that sounds like
and there's a
weird
preferred
to say,
style
but
that
there's
emerges.
a preferred style that emerges, or you do things outside. So it goes from like appreciating and valuing what other people bring to the table, or recognizing this doesn't capture all of them, to going, oh no, like, oh, you're such a XYZ, or that's who you are. That's,
and then it becomes the culture. Like the organization takes it on as this is our culture.
This is who we are.
And it's not accurate.
When I go back to the Edgewalker one you and I did a few weeks ago, if everybody in your organization is an Edgewalker, that's a problem.
That's a problem.
Right.
You don't want that.
You need to have a balance, right?
But I, what's interesting is I wouldn't be surprised if that happened.
Sure,
and because, when you look in the DISC world, we attract and we hire in our own likeness.
That's right.
Yes.
Right. When you think about biases. So when you start to look at DISC from the DISC view, is like, oh, we're I's, so we're all exuberant and vocal and positive and outgoing. And then we like other people who are also vocal, positive, outgoing, people, whatever. And so we start to look at that person and go, I like that person. I just don't know why. Right. And then,
just remind me of
they
someone.
remind me of somebody. And so that's why it's interesting to do the DISC assessment after somebody's been hired, to go, we are an I culture, right? Everybody here is an I, and anybody that we interview that's kind of like curmudgeon-y and really detail oriented and not warm and inviting in their behavior, we go, they're just not a good fit.
Right.
And this
Such
is
a risk.
the good fit piece, right? This is where, for me, it gets down. A lot of the work that I do comes to cultural values at the heart of it. And I recently went through a Stanford program for executives, and it came down to one of the classes on strategic leadership and values-based leadership. It was, what are our moral senses? What are our moral intuitions? And we all have them. And it was trying to understand then, if we can understand our own values and our purpose for being here, we can align in such a way that we can lead more effectively. But if we don't understand our values, we start to hire for fit, and then we have groupthink.
Yeah.
And then we get away from the innovation we're actually looking for, or performance that will allow us to move beyond the normal or the average. Right? And we think, oh no, but we're doing good because we think this way so we can move fast. It's like that actually won't help you in the long run if you're trying to break through the norms of what's happening today. And that's what companies have to be. They have to be ready and agile.
Yeah. So that's why I go back to that growth mindset, right? I love the values piece versus fit. And you lose a lot when it comes to diversity and inclusion, right? And I think DISC is when you think of diversity of thought, you lose a lot. And the reality is it's a behavior assessment. So it is growth oriented in the sense that we can, like you said, Nate, earlier, change our behavior. But guess what? In a culture, they're missing some things.
Yeah. What's the motivation to change?
What's the motivation to change? We're missing some different ways of thinking and approaching work that's actually going to make us more effective. But if we're a culture of I's, we don't value, because our culture, we elevate people who are warm, inviting, outgoing, outspoken, influential, right? That I style. The problem is you miss out on people who are detail oriented and are going to call out flaws and things, a little less optimistic and looking for what's going to go wrong. And in that kind of culture, we start to silence those people, or really avoid those people, or they don't really get to participate in decision making or the different conversations because they're too quote unquote negative, right? They're the curmudgeon, and we start to use that judgment language towards those individuals, and the next thing we know, they're walking out our door because they don't fit. Right. So I think that's something we really need to be cautious of when it comes to these different pieces and labels, and how we're creating a culture around certain behavioral fit stuff.
Yeah, that's good. That's great. So we need to land this plane. This was already a fantastic conversation. I know we can keep going with this and probably record multiple podcasts on it. But I want to talk about final takeaways. And Kristen, I'd love to hear your perspective on the why organizations should be considering this.
Yes. Well, I think why they should consider assessments is because it's finding the strengths of people. It's looking at the heart and how we can collaborate and connect with people. And without having assessments and understanding each other better, we're not going to be able to collaborate. So when you have this perspective, it comes down to, if our focus is on innovation, and this is buzzwords, right? But truly, if we're trying to be innovative organizations, if we're trying to be agile, and that's what we need for what the future of work is demanding, if we're going to do that, we have to understand people from other cultures, people who work and think differently than us. And then it ties it right back together to say, like, we're going to have conflict. So how do we collaborate more effectively? So the assessments themselves are amazing tools, and we have to learn about the humans behind the responses that they give.
That's right. I love that. Ryan, final takeaway.
Yeah, I think I just say they're worth it. Taking the time to take the assessment. I said earlier, there's a reason why the ones cost as much as they do. It's because there's a lot of time, research, and all those things trying to figure out how do we better understand ourselves, but then also how do we better understand other people. When you look at the challenges of today, like retention and trying to get people to stay at your organizations, unless you're doing the work, right, to grow yourself as a leader that's listening to this podcast, or as an organization, you're really going to struggle with that. Where people don't understand the impact of their behavior, and you're going to watch people walk out your door. So, I mean, on a very practical note, assessments are the place to start, because it really level sets the conversation. It gives you insight to actually have some actionable steps to take.
I love that. Closing that revolving door. Nathan.
Yeah, I would say you're not alone. You don't have to figure this out yourself. There's a lot of tools out there available to you. And we stand ready to partner with you and figure that out. We're excited to be partnering with Kristen as well. We have a lot of tools that we could talk through and figure out what the right fit is. So don't feel like you have to start from scratch. There's resources to help.
Love that. And just to kind of jump on what Nathan said, like you said, you're not alone. And we have a whole range of professionals with a whole spectrum of certifications for different assessments to help you and your company become and stay employers of choice. And we want to help you get there. Thank you so much, Kristen, for joining us on today's podcast.
My pleasure.
Her podcast and website is linked in the comments, as well as our website, frontlineon.com, where you can learn more about the assessments that we can offer and how we can help you get better together. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Nathan.
Thank you,
joined
Nick.
us behind the front line. We'll see you next time.